Welcome to the new podcast by my Near Kitchen in Helsinki blog. This is a series of interviews with researchers, practitioners, activists, and any other food-related people in Finland, discussing their works, the topics that emerge around food, current situation, but also future projections. In the near future or later on, the location of the guests may extend beyond the borders of Finland, but my priority, at least for now, will be to see the local picture. Today's guest on the podcast is researcher and my dear friend, Francesca Allievi. Francesca defended her doctoral dissertation about meat consumption as a wicked problem a few years ago, and since then she has been working on increasing awareness of food sustainability, particularly among young people. She and I talked about the complexity of food sustainability and the educational tools she developed with her colleagues to teach this complexity. Hope you enjoy. Okay, hello, Francesca. How are you?
Hello. Hi, all good, and thanks for having me here.
I'm super happy because we've been friends for a few years now, and it was food that brought us together. So I think it was natural to invite you to this podcast, and I'm so happy. And it's a very interesting topic yet again that we're going to discuss. So to start with, can you introduce yourself a little, your academic background, your research interests, but also your personal relationship with food and your personal food-related activities?
Yes. So actually, my first academic background is in environmental and land planning engineering. So I've got my bachelor and master degree in this from Italy. And then I've moved to Finland, and I've been working for some years at the Finland Futures Research Center. And there I have started to move more towards the topics related to sustainability, even though they were still more about sustainability of energy use, for example. But then in one project that got funded there in Finland Futures Research Center, I started my PhD studies. And during my PhD, then I moved specifically to food sustainability issues. And finally, I did the research topic of my PhD was meat consumption, and how meat consumption has evolved and changed all over the world in the past 60 years. Mm-hmm. And I've looked at that from the point of view really of the data, and then also from the point of view of policies. And at the same time with the PhD studies, I was also involved in other things. I was working with some NGOs, for example, dealing with protection of the rainforest and developing some sustainable agriculture projects there. Then I was doing different lectures or small presentations in the form of education to the civil society. For really anyone, starting with kids that were 11 to 12 years old and ending with people who were already retired and into their late 70s or beginning of their 80s. Mm-hmm. So this has little by little shaped also my interests into these food sustainability issues and the role of meat consumption in food sustainability. And so on. And now I've been this is my third year in YAMK, University of Applied Sciences in Jyväskylä, where I am a lecturer, full-time lecturer. And it's interesting because the degree is in tourism and hospitality management, but there is a big chunk of courses on sustainable gastronomy. So I teach all sorts of courses, both online and also in face-to-face classes dealing with these topics. So it's been really, really nice to be able now to gather a bit all the different experiences and networks and knowledge that I have gathered in the past few years during the PhD studies and bring them to the students and bring them into my teaching. So this is the academic side or the work side, but on a more personal level, I try to, in a way, in my very giving my very small contribution to practicing what I preach. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I've been having a gardening plot now for the past 3 years. That I'm very happy about. My great grandparents were all farmers, so I have this like family history connected to farming and farming practices. And I have grown up with my grandpa that was growing a lot of vegetables in his backyard. So I've been growing up seeing physically how food is brought to the table, and having my my grandparents involved into growing food and cooking. And so family, in my family, has always been very important to have a strong connection to food and eating good food and so on. So I try to continue doing that as well. And actually also in this past almost 13 years that I've lived in Finland, food has definitely been an element that has contributed to building a community of people. And I think also the friendship with you is a good example of that food has been the connecting point. And yeah, it's been nice to organize dinners at my place, sharing food with neighbors and so on. So that has definitely contributed to building my life here.
Yeah, and I visited to this plot you have, if you remember.
Yes, true.
It's also the one by the lake, the small
yes
plot, and also the big one, and it was really good. And I still want to come again to Tampere.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's dive right into the big topic on the title, which is the complexity of food sustainability. So what do you mean by complexity of food sustainability, and how should we address this complexity?
Yeah, so complexity, with complexity, I mean that when we deal with food sustainability, and of course, food sustainability is like an umbrella word, and under that, there are many different topics. There are topics related to sustainable agriculture, like I have already mentioned, but there are also issues related to nutrition, so nutritional challenges. There are problems related to food security, for example. There is problems related to food loss and food waste. So there is really, it's already like complex as a topic. So there are many, in a way, subtopics and areas to be included. And in turn, because there are all these sub areas, there are, of course, a lot of actors and perspectives that need to be included if we want to go towards a more sustainable direction. Because we have, of course, actors and agents in the food system that have priorities that are very different. So basically, it's complex because there is not a straightforward answer in most cases. In most cases, it's actually pretty hard to say, okay, what is the good thing to do? What is there is not an answer like yes or no in most cases. If we think of more like the academic language, the word that is used to describe these sort of situations, and the one also that I was using in my PhD was that of wicked problems. And of course, this is also something that you are very familiar with. And there are different methods and that attempt to give, in a way, the frameworks and the tools that are necessary to manage these problems. So not to solve, but to manage these problems and their possible solutions. So when thinking of these complex issues, so I think that one key thing definitely can be dialogue and inclusiveness of all these different perspectives and actors. I think this is something that really we cannot do without if we are to change the way that things have been done so far. And I think also the global pandemic that is going on at the moment has highlighted even more how we are all interconnected with each other, even if we may think that we are in geographical places that are very far from each other or living lives that are very far from each other. But I think that the food system really is a perfect example of how interconnected we really are. So this generates complexity, but also should be the starting point to really act on cooperation mechanisms using more creativity, more imagination, and maybe also should be the starting point to question a bit our values and our way of moving in the world and acting in the world. So this can be, in my opinion, all starting points at least to address this complexity.
Mm-hmm. So then, how can you define a sustainable food system? I mean, it is complex, so the definition is complex as well. But as much as possible, how can you define it? And you already said talk about the problems, but in your opinion, what are the most urgent points in the current system that needs some kind of intervention or an action?
Yeah, so definitely this is a really hard question. So we have, as I was saying before, the issue is very complex. So I think it's pretty much impossible to give, and I wouldn't even maybe want to give one definition that tries to fit, because there is so much variation in the world that I think one definition is not enough. But one starting point that I see as being very urgent is definitely that related to environmental issues. Mm-hmm. So I guess many of the people who are listening may be familiar also with the framework given by the United Nations of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a framework that it's now widely used for different scopes, from education to policy making. Sometimes maybe even abused, I would dare to say, because then sometimes I think that the attention is going too far from the base of everything that we have in society, and that is natural resources. Mm-hmm. So it's of course there are many things that are very important to be addressed. But if we don't take care very strongly of natural resources first, then everything else is going to collapse. And also there is, for example, one researcher from the Stockholm Resilience Center that in one presentation was talking about how food is connecting all these sustainable development goals. So and how the environmental resources are at the basis of all the sustainable development goals. So if we don't start from there, and if we don't keep in mind that food really acts on other issues as well, it acts on issues related to poverty, for example, it acts on issues related to how we produce and consume things in this world, and so on. I think really the environment and the taking care of the environmental resources should be even higher in the agenda than it is now, and not just in the political agenda, but in the agenda of everyone, like our personal agenda. So that's something that maybe I don't see being done enough yet.
Yeah, and this also connects to my next question, but also your dissertation as well. It was about meat production and consumption, and it's affecting, as you have extensively researched, it has adverse effects on climate change and food sustainability. And this is where I want to come now, the question of meat. How is the meat production and consumption affecting? And maybe you can start by talking about the parameters that are considered and explain it that way.
Yeah, so definitely I think now when connecting, for example, to what I was just saying before, so the use of natural resources that are becoming, that are limited and are in a way more and more threatened around the world. Definitely the production of meat is among different types of food is the one that requires the most amount of land, because animals need to eat themselves before we or some of us eat the animals. So that requires extensive amounts of land. And then it requires huge amounts of water, because once again, the process becomes very long. So we need to first grow the cereals and the fodder that animals are eating, then the processing of the meat, the transportation, and so on. So that also, it's a very water intensive food. So that's also another problem. And then, of course, there is the problem of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if we look at these three, we see that really the situation is quite critical. For example, also when we think about use of land, it's not just about how much land is used, but also often where is that land that is used, because unfortunately the situation is that, for example, we see large patches of rainforest. Mm-hmm. So in an ecosystem that is very precious and very rich and very important for the well-being of everything else in the planet, that are being destroyed because they are in a favorable place to grow then certain ingredients that are necessary for making animal feeds. So this is a huge problem, and it's a problem that, as going back to something else that I mentioned earlier, really shortens also this geographical distance between what happens, for example, in Europe and what happens in, for example, South America. There is no distance at all when we think about that. So what happens here has a very immediate and direct consequence in a very far away place. And then when we think about water, the problem is that the amount of water that can be used for agriculture, because it's fresh water, because it's not salted and so on, it's very limited. So again, if huge quantities are used for this very intensive type of food, it's probably not the best use that we can do of a limited resources like water. And of course, also I think the idea of greenhouse gas emissions is now something that also in the public discussions and in the civil society is quite widespread, and people are familiar with that idea. So definitely also, especially bovine meat has really high greenhouse gas emissions. So of course, these are all elements that do not give a very favorable picture to the production and consumption of meat, especially the way that is done nowadays, which is very different from what was done maybe even just 60 years ago or 70 years ago. So now we have this massive production that has these enormous environmental consequences.
Here, I just want to be clear. When we talk about meat production and consumption effects, are we talking about all kinds of meat, or are there some differences between different kinds of meat?
So yes, of course there are differences. So for example, in my PhD, I analyzed the three main types of meat that are consumed globally. So that is beef, so cow, bovine meat. Mm-hmm. Poultry, so mainly chicken meat, and pig meat. And of course, there are differences in the sense that poultry or chicken meat is that uses these resources more efficiently and has lower greenhouse gas emissions, mm-hmm. While bovine meat is the most intensive one. So that definitely should be kept in mind. And I would like to add that another thing that needs to be taken into account is that I think now we see a trend, at least in some European countries, for a higher demand for vegan options, vegetarian option, and at least a slight decline in the consumption of meat. But then when we think of this globally, we have other countries where the situation is opposite, because there has been historically this association of a higher level of income associated with a certain, let's say, Western consumption style, and that's associated with, for example, meat products as well, and dairy products as well. So there are countries in the world, in Asia, for example, that are moving away from their more traditional type of food and diets, and moving towards a more Western-like consumption style. And this, of course, creates massive problems to the environment.
Well, you said a little bit about this, different countries, but I work mostly with the grassroots food movements, such as food justice, right to the food, and nonprofit organizations working on these topics. And I know a little bit about the policy, but can you say a little bit about which countries are doing policy level something about meat and dairy, of course, and are there any good examples?
Yeah, so there is again a huge variation in what countries all over the world are doing in this sense. So when we look, for example, at the nutritional guidelines in countries all over the world, there are still countries that, for example, do not have nutritional guidelines. Then there are countries that do have nutritional guidelines, but do not have very specific suggestions concerning, for example, meat. Or maybe they have, but they are very vague. Maybe they are recommending, for example, that white meat should be preferred over red meat, but everything is very vague. And then there are countries, and I think Finland is a good example of that, where the food policies and the nutritional guidelines are rather strong in this sense, where there are also some attempts to link certain nutritional guidelines, so certain recommendation for diets, with elements of sustainability. So they might go as far as suggesting specific amounts per week of meat per week, for example. I think still one thing that needs to be noted is that I assume that you are familiar with the report that was released last year by the Eat Lancet group. So where they tried to really understand what is the diet, the so-called planetary diet that should be really in a way adapted by everyone in order to be respectful of the nutritional aspect and the environmental protection. And I think that still the guidelines that are present even in the countries like Finland or Sweden that are doing quite well in terms of nutritional guidelines are still pretty far from the recommendations that were given, for example, in that report. So basically, even when those nutritional guidelines exist and try to address the link of meat consumption with sustainability and environmental resources and so on, still the quantities that are recommended are much higher than those that, for example, have been suggested in that report.
Yeah, but so there's a lot of problems around meat, but we can't just say, oh, let's just reduce the amount of production. Then you in your dissertation, I think one of the most interesting parts to read for me was to see like the effects of just reducing the meat, and then but does it really help, or what other things should be done, because there are also questions of regarding cereal consumption and grain and wheat price increases then. So it's not just one simple equation again. And you argue that a complex set of actions should be implemented. So can you explain this a little bit, and what kind of possible set of actions? You said a little bit in the beginning, like cooperations and things like that. But what in general? And you can speak specifically about meat question, but you can also extend this to food sustainability in general.
Yes, so definitely, I think that once again we are dealing with something that is very complex. So. And once again, we are dealing with a situation where we have to look at the whole world and how different parts of the world are interconnected with each other. So what happens somewhere may have an effect on for example, the economy of a very far away country. So the example you gave of possible changes in, for example, grain and wheat prices, that's definitely one that should be addressed. So I would say once again that the actions that are needed are of different kinds and need to be at different levels. So there needs to be definitely, for example, a higher level of communication between at the policy making level between those who, for example, write the nutritional guidelines and those who deal with environmental issues. That already would probably generate a set of policies that would be in a way more coherent with what is actually needed. Mm-hmm. And that could be one, and that could have, for example, effects on education in that sense. So I think that really what we should be aiming at as a society is not to try to find one silver bullet. Sometimes this definition is used that can solve everything, but try to develop really a dialogue and an assessment of everything that needs to be taken into account, which is very difficult. It's very difficult, and I realize that my answer maybe seems to be not enough, but there is so many aspects that need to be considered that I don't see any other way than really to create a dialogue that is as respectful and inclusive as possible.
Yeah, and the question is not getting any easier with COVID-19, not right now, and possibly not for the future as well. I mean, it didn't. COVID-19 puts a large magnifying glass on all the problems that we actually knew and made them even more urgent, I think. So how do you think, for example, the effects of COVID-19 for the future? I mean, even if the COVID-19 itself, if we deal with, if we control tomorrow, we have a vaccine and, and we control it and we have some kind of new normal, at least, there will be still some effects on the whole system, I mean, on society, but specifically on the food system. What do you think about the future related to COVID-19?
Yeah, so what I think is probably not what is gonna happen, but it's still my hope that I would hope that people would learn not to give things for granted. So I think food is the perfect example for that. We have seen now with COVID-19 huge, as you said, in a way, it has been highlighted a lot of things that we knew already. Problems with food distribution have come out. Problems with matching the demand and the offer, problems with food security issues. I think that in the majority of the countries that have been affected by COVID-19, the people using, for example, services of related to food, so people that need to use these services given by the government or NGOs or the church to have food to eat. I think the amount of people using these services has increased enormously. So I think it has revealed in a way how fragile is the system that has been built also around food and the distribution of food, and also I think it has highlighted how we are relying on this idea that things will always go smoothly, that that massive amounts of, for example, cereals that are needed or soy that is needed to feed the animals can move freely from one country to the other, and maybe that's not like that. That's maybe we should be questioning ourselves: is that something that is really necessary? Can we do things maybe in a different way? Can we change our consumption styles, so that maybe certain things become less necessary. And so my hope is that people don't give things for granted anymore. But then again, according to what I see around me, I don't trust this fully. Yeah. So even just the idea that we can go to the supermarket and always find everything that we want, I think that's not very healthy thought. And it's not healthy for the food system, for the environment, and even for social issues either. So I'm hoping that at least the question would remain there and would change the approach that people have concerning these issues.
But I think it now what you said in the end connects to my next question about the awareness of food sustainability in civil society, and it also connects to your more recent work that you have been doing. Can you briefly explain how can we increase the awareness of food sustainability? I mean, personally, I'm seeing every now and then some articles, for example, from big newspapers like The Guardian, the BBC, and they write about veganism or meat consumption from different points of view. And of course, it's not easy to tell or to communicate the complexity of these issues in one newspaper article. But sometimes the communication is so simplified that the discussion becomes too simplified and too black and white, because I also check the comments of people, how people are reacting. And so in the end, we talk about very extreme situations, and we lose the gray areas, which are a lot, and in between discussions. So how do you think we can increase the awareness in civil society?
Yeah, definitely. This is an interesting point, and once again, probably one where there is not just one solution or one answer, but again, a set of solutions should be maybe implemented. I think definitely, and maybe we will talk about this more in the next part of the podcast. But education can be one starting point, and education at all levels. And it's not just the education that we do formally in the schools or in the university classroom, but also I'm a strong advocate for the more non-formal types of education. So everything that kids or students learn also from the place where they study and where they live. So it can be, for example, what happens in the canteen, what happens in the home economics classes, for example, in that there are, at least here in Finland, in elementary school. I think all those elements are important places where something different can be taught from a very early age, and from an age where people are still shaping their priorities, their values, their views of the world. So that's a definitely important thing. But of course, there could be other places as well. There could be, for example, labels could be another place. But then again, I see nowadays an increasing level of an increasing amount of labels available also on food packages, and now I'm afraid that it's going more to the direction where everything becomes so confusing for most people that I don't know if those can be maybe so effective. But I think also other channels, maybe also, and nowadays, of course, there is huge use of social media. And podcasts like yours, I think also they are definitely excellent platforms to discuss certain topics that definitely are not, in a way, the sexiest topics to talk about. So maybe some people are even a bit annoyed to always hear some discussion about, oh, you shouldn't eat this, or you shouldn't eat that.
But that's I think at one point that I find, especially when that's why I gave the example of the newspaper articles, because it is about you should do this, you should do that. Maybe not exactly in these words, but it doesn't open discussion in the richer sense, but more like then some people start already feeling attacked, and some other people feel this, and they try to they just want to prove that what they are doing is not wrong, but it doesn't open any dialogue that you were mentioning. Within the civil society itself, at least. So, but I definitely agree with the role of education, and it brings us to our final big topic, which is your most recent work, and you recently developed a toolkit, educational toolkit, to communicate or to teach the complexity of food sustainability. And you also, with your two colleagues, and you won an award for that. So can you? And I'm going to give the link to this for whoever is interested. They can download the toolkit. I'm going to give the link in description wherever, in which platforms that are possible. But you can also give information about where people can find it and what it is, first of all.
Yeah. So to introduce a bit why I got to this. Definitely, as I was mentioning earlier, this possibility to discuss these topics also with civil society has been something that I've been doing all the time during my PhD studies. And then when trying to in a way gather my thoughts towards the end of the PhD process, and reflecting on all the experiences and that had happened alongside with that, I started also to reflect on really what is the role of the place that I was working in. So academia, what is the role of universities? What is the role of the education that takes place in university in discussing or promoting certain views on food sustainability issues, for example. And my perception was this, at least a few years ago, when I defended the PhD, was that not enough was being done, and that still there was a lot of education, even in faculties related, for example, to agriculture, that had this, let's say, more narrow and traditional point of view, where disciplines are not talking with each other, for example. And that was a bit the starting point to reflect on how things could be changed. And of course, then when I have been when I become a lecturer myself, and I've had the possibility to bring this theory into practice in my classes, I started to think about the kind of tools that I can use to support a bit different view of things in my courses. And I started to use this food sustainability index, which is something that has been developed by the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition together with The Economist in the past almost 4 years. And it's an index that has evolved during the past 6 years. It now covers 67 countries from all over the world, and has almost 90 different indicators included. So it's a composite index. And the idea is that it tries to cover different areas. So it covers sustainable agriculture, and inside sustainable agriculture, there are indicators related to, for example, the use of water in agriculture, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. Then there are indicators related to food loss and waste. So, for example, food waste per capita. But then there are also indicators related to diets, composition of diets, so the nutritional part. So, for example, salt intake or obesity rate, and so on. So it really tries to cover everything. And I thought it is a good tool, but I also saw it as something that was a bit limited, because it assesses all these indicators for all these countries and then gives a score. And I was a bit afraid that then if I present this like this to the students, for example, that then this is going to be the end. Like, okay, now we see which is the best country.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very limited because for me, that's not the end, that's the starting point. So why does a country, for example, why does a country have this score? Are there areas where this country is doing really well, but then maybe areas where it's not doing so well? And this is the case, for example, with many Western countries where maybe many issues are okay, but then when we look at food waste per capita, for example, is pretty high and much higher than other countries. Or then this can be the starting point to reflect also about, okay, why is the situation in this country so different from this other country? What is the context? What is the cultural context? What is the political context? What is the societal context that gives these values? So little by little, we started, me and two other colleagues, to develop this toolkit, let's call it like this, because there is a whole set of materials that anyone can go and download and use in their classrooms. So there is some quiz, there is some slides, there is some also further readings and suggestions for further assignments that can be used. There are some video tutorials. And then there are especially the instructions to carry out 2 different types of workshops with the students. And they both involve a lot of group work. And in one, students really look at the situation of one country or more than one country. And as I said, try to understand what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, why there are those strengths and weaknesses, how maybe possibly things could even be changed. And this is something that I've seen becomes incredibly interesting, especially when you have a group of students that has different geographical backgrounds, because then they have these like insider's knowledge about their home country, for example, then they can really bring it to the exercise. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, it acts even more on empathy and imagination. So it's a role-playing sort of game where different groups of students try to imagine what it is to be, for example, a farmer or a nutritionist or a policymaker or a food businessman. And they try, starting from this set of indicators that I was very quickly describing before, to imagine what are the priorities for these different stakeholders. And then we have a dialogue in the end where we see that really all these different priorities need to talk to each other and need to find, in a way, a common solution in order to be able to move towards a more sustainable direction. And this is something that I have used in my personal, in a way, journey that started with some random experiments 3 years ago. Over cooperations also with other lecturers in other universities from very different disciplines. We have tried this with students from design, from engineering, from nutrition, from tourism and hospitality management. Even we had one student participating in one workshop. He was from mathematics, for example, and he was so excited and he had so great ideas that I was really impressed. So this has been tested in a variety of situations in class, in the classroom, when that has been possible. And of course, now with COVID-19, or then in the situation where we have been cooperating with people from other institutions online. So through using Zoom or using Teams and then doing this group work online. And the feedback that has come from the students has been, in general, really positive. And many have been then able to bring also the thoughts and the reflections coming from these exercises into their personal research projects. So we tried to develop a tool that really can create more creative solutions and a higher use of imagination and a higher use of system thinking as well in approaching these issues.
Yeah, it's for me. It's super interesting. Also, I was in the webinar where you talked about it yesterday. It's super interesting because I come from a design background, and we use a lot of participatory design methods, and so it was also for me very, very interesting to see all these, this as a toolkit, especially like a compact toolkit, and to see how it enriches the conversation and the ideas coming from the students. But one thing that I want to ask about it is, can you use it with younger generations, which is my current area of interest, like teenagers, high school students. Of course, not as it is, but with some variations, with some different versions.
Yeah, I would say why not? And actually, the idea that we have always had is that this is not something that, okay, now it's a finished, polished version and that's it, and it's going to be like this forever. But on the contrary, it's something that I'm very happy that it's now out there. Anyone can go and download it and then look at the materials and try to adapt those materials to their specific needs. And of course, it is taught with higher education in mind, so with the university level. But no one is stopping anyone from using this also in the context of high school, for example. And I'm sure that by connecting some of the materials available with things that are discussed, for example, in the classroom, I'm sure that that shouldn't be a problem. So it maybe just needs a little bit adjustment in terms of how things are communicated, if that's necessary, because in the end, the workshops, I mean, there is no rocket science in there. I mean, it's just more about creating a process of reflection and dialogue and empathy also especially in the second workshop, where students imagine to be one specific actor in the food system. So I think it's very adaptable, and I would like it to be very adaptable. And I think that definitely you are not the first one who asked this. We have received already other requests in this sense. So I think that definitely one of the next developments for this work would be to make it available and more approachable also for people who teach or want to teach to a younger generation.
So one more time, how can people reach if they want to download, even though I'm going to put the link in the description in YouTube at least, but
yeah, so as I was mentioning, the whole work started from this food sustainability index that was developed by the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition together with The Economist. So the toolkit can be accessed from the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition website, which is www.barillacfn.com. You will see in the menu there is one tab that is educational programs, and under that you will find this specific toolkit that is called FSI, so the acronym of Food Sustainability Index, EDU. So FSI EDU from the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition website. And as you said, you will also put the link. So I really encourage anyone who is in the audience and who is maybe a lecturer to use this toolkit. And I would be very happy to get feedback and suggestions.
Definitely. So these are all my questions. And I just finally want to ask you, do you have any final words or comments or anything else you want to say? The final word is yours.
Yeah, so just very quickly, first, I would like to thank you because with this podcast, I have also had the opportunity to step out from the context that I am more used to. So the context of teaching in university or doing research in university that are sometimes maybe also quite rigid or tend to be quite rigid. So in a way, it's nice to have had the chance to have maybe an easier going conversation. I'm very happy about that. And the other point is that I think we have repeated now many times in this conversation the word complexity and how these issues are complex and how there is no solution that fits all. And I understand that these can be very maybe even scary. So I understand that people may think, why should I be doing anything at all if this is so complex? But I would like to invite people and encourage people not to be, in a way, overwhelmed by this complexity, but to use this complexity as the starting point to maybe learn something new, maybe put ourselves up for discussion, maybe even question our values and the actions that we do every day, the choices we make every day. And I would like to conclude with something that one of my students said at the end of one of my courses, that he said that he had come to the course thinking that he would find some answers, but he left the course thinking that now he has no answers, but he has the right questions. So I think that that was for me a huge positive feedback. So.
Absolutely. All right, so thank you one more time for accepting this interview. It was super nice. And I'll definitely continue following your work. And of course, we're going to be communicating in other areas as well. So thanks again, and bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.